Good evening. My name is Sunsara Taylor, and you are listening to We Only Want the World here on WBAI 99.5 FM in New York City and WPFW 89.3 FM in Washington, D.C. Here on We Only Want the World, we put humanity first, never America first. And we look at the whole world, how it is and how it could be radically changed through a real revolution. I'm a follower of the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian and a fighter for revolution. And tonight, we have a special 2-hour broadcast on the abortion rights emergency. Let's begin. Unbelievable as it may seem, in the 21st century, there are still people, including people in positions of power and authority, who are determined to force women to bear children, regardless of the situation, the feelings, and the better judgment of those women themselves. This is a way of enslaving women to the dictates of an oppressive, male supremacist, patriarchal system. And that is what the cruel fanatics who are determined to deny women the right to abortion are really all about. This statement, this is a quote I just read from Bob Avakian, and it captures well what we are facing today and the most extreme abortion ban ever made into law in the nearly 50 years since abortion has been legal in this country. It is now illegal in the state of Texas to perform or to assist a woman in obtaining an abortion after about 6 weeks into pregnancy, long before most women even know they're pregnant. At the same time, coming up this December 1st, the Supreme Court of the United States has agreed to hear a case, another abortion ban out of Mississippi, that is a direct challenge to the landmark 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, which first legalized abortion nationwide. This is threatening to overturn or radically curtail abortion protections nationwide. We sit at a tipping point in what has been a decades-long Christian fascist assault on women's right to control their own bodies and their own reproduction and their very lives. And yet, precisely at this moment, very few people understand that this is going on. This Texas ban caught most people by surprise, and very few understand the stakes of this upcoming December 1st Supreme Court case out of Mississippi. This is a situation that tonight's 2-hour special broadcast, it's a special emergency town hall edition of We Only Want the World on the abortion rights emergency. This is what this town hall is aimed at helping transform, to wake people up to this emergency, to dig into where this has come from, how we got to this place, and what is needed to get us out of it. And I will note right up front that there are important marches that have been called on October 2nd across the country by the Women's March and other organizations for reproductive rights. And it's extremely important in this moment that these marches be as powerful, as determined, as uncompromising, as massive as possible, and that they not be merely one-off events where people go and vent their frustration and go back to their lives and go back to sleep. They need to be part of launching massive society-wide sustained protest and refusal to let women be slammed backwards. This is very important, and we're going to get into this in tonight's discussion and roundtable, and we're also going to be digging into the deeper questions afoot in this, of what kind of society would enslave women in this kind of way, and what kind of future do we need. And this town hall is to contribute to opening up that kind of debate and ferment and organizing along with the struggle that is needed in the streets right now. Tonight's special broadcast is also co-sponsored by two organizations. One is refusefascism.org, and the other is the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less Show. I'm going to say a word about each of them before we begin. Refusefascism.org unites with people from diverse perspectives to sound the alarm and prevent the consolidation of an American fascism. Through its website, podcast, social media, and publications, it engages, dialogues, and debates with a broad array of writers, scholars, legal experts, and people from different walks of life to educate people on the roots, the nature, the trajectory of the real and present danger of fascism in this country. And through this engagement, Refuse Fascism is forging the understanding and the relationships aimed at preventing the consolidation of fascism. Since its founding shortly after the election of Donald Trump, refusefascism.org has not wavered in its pledge to the people of the world. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. The RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show, is a show about a real revolution, because nothing less than the overthrow of the system of capitalism imperialism can end the nightmare of global exploitation, immiseration, white supremacy, male supremacy, climate destruction, and wars for empire that this system inflicts on the masses of people here and all over the world. The RNL show roots itself in the new communism that's been forged by Bob Avakian, which contains the strategy for an actual revolution, a vision and concrete blueprint for the new liberating society that would replace this one, a thoroughly scientific approach that everyone can take up and contribute to making this revolution, and much more. The RNL show brings you BA's ongoing leadership, interviews with writers and thinkers from different perspectives, illustrated essays, revolutionary analysis of key developments of the day, and much more, so that you can learn about and act together with others increasingly across this country towards the revolution that is needed to emancipate all of humanity. The RNL Revolution Nothing Less show releases new episodes at youtube.com/therevcoms every Thursday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern. I am a co-host of the RNL show. And with that, I want to welcome everybody tuning in New York City to WBAI, in DC to WPFW and the surrounding communities, and online at refusefascism.org and at the RNL YouTube channel, youtube.com/therevcoms, and anywhere else you might be tuning in. So let me explain the format for our evening, and then we'll dive right in. We're going to begin with a special message from the courageous longtime abortion provider, Dr. Warren Hearn. That'll be followed by excerpts of an interview that I did with Dalia Lithwick, who is the writer about the courts and the law at Slate.com. She's also the host of the Amicus podcast, and she's going to be getting into the stakes of this Mississippi abortion ban and the ban in Texas. And then we will move into a roundtable with three guests that I'll introduce more fully when we get to that portion. Michelle Chai is a leader of the Los Angeles Revolution Club. Sam Goldman is on the editorial board of refusefascism.org, and Tony Redtree is a writer for revcom.us. So in the later portion, we'll have a roundtable discussion with them. So with that, let's get started. Dr. Warren Hearn has been providing abortion services full-time since 1973. He currently provides abortion to women from all over the world, including at the later stages in pregnancy. He's one of the few doctors who does this and does so publicly, when this requires special skill and mainly is geared towards women with dangerous complications or women who, because of the onerous and unjust restrictions in their home, the places where they live, are unable to access abortion where they live. He has withstood threats, violence, and the assassination of his colleagues and friends, but he has never backed down in his commitment to women. These days, he is increasingly seeing women at his clinic from Texas who cannot get abortions there anymore. So this is his message, recorded special for tonight's program.
Hello, I'm Dr. Warren Hearn. I'm director of the Boulder Abortion Clinic, which is my private medical practice. I would like to thank Sunsara for inviting me to speak to your conference about the Texas abortion law and its effects on the women who need these services. The current Texas law in dispute, SB 8, is notorious because it bans abortion after 6 weeks when a fetal heartbeat exists. It does not. A clear violation of Roe v. Wade, which provides constitutional protection for a woman's right to interrupt a pregnancy at that stage. The most pernicious aspect of this law, of course, is that it deputizes all citizens to become enforcers of the law and pays them a $10,000 bounty for reporting anyone who helps a woman obtain an abortion. It is the mentality of the witch hunt and mob rule from medieval times. It turns citizens against each other. The most outrageous turn of events, however, is the fact that the U.S. Supreme Court approved of this blatantly unconstitutional violation of a woman's rights and due process, not to mention the rights of those who are accused of breaking the law. Both Texas and the U.S. Supreme Court effectively nullified the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights for women in Texas by these actions. We have regressed to the 18th century on our way back to the 4th century. This means that women in Texas without the means to travel out of state cannot have safe abortions. They will have unsafe abortions and die, even though we have made early abortion one of the safest medical and surgical procedures ever performed in the history of medicine. 60 years ago, Texas women had to travel to Mexico to have abortions. Many of them died. Governor Abbott and the Texas legislature have, at minimum, sent Texas women back to that barbaric condition. The U.S. Supreme Court has nullified its own credibility by this action. The Supreme Court can no longer be viewed as anything more than a political tool for a repressive political agenda of the radical political and religious right in the United States. This is no accident. Now we have the spectacle of Amy Coney Barrett, the newest justice on the court, claiming that she is no political hack. She is. Barrett, who is officially a handmaid in her own medieval Catholic religious cult that is right out of the Dark Ages and celebrates an authoritarian, patriarchal ideology in which women are submissive, made this incredible statement while standing next to Mitch McConnell at a private partisan event in Kentucky. She is on the court because McConnell, in a ruthless and anti-democratic maneuver, refused to grant even a hearing for the confirmation of Merrick Garland in 2016, a year before the beginning of the next presidential term, and then rammed the Barrett nomination through the Senate a few weeks before the 2020 election in a strategy to put her in a position to override the U.S. presidential election in case, as they anticipated, Donald Trump lost the election. Mitchell, Trump, and their Republican sycophants planned a superficially legal but transparently anti-democratic and unconstitutional coup d'etat to maintain Donald Trump in office as president, even if he were rejected at the polls, as he was. During Trump's 4 years as president, he appointed and Mitchell confirmed a large number of federal judges, many of them completely incompetent and unqualified, to assure an authoritarian dominance of the federal court system. Lest anyone think that any of this is normal, contemplate the fact that, despite his ostentatious moral depravity, Donald Trump was supported by 82% of the white Christian evangelical voters in 2016, largely because he promised to put anti-abortion justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. This in spite of his own numerous statements prior to running for president that he was pro-choice. Due to the fact, among other things, that millions of Democrats who voted for Barack Obama did not bother to vote for Hillary Clinton, Trump won enough electoral votes to be elected and certified as president. His payback for the Christians was to nominate people for the U.S. Supreme Court who were certifiably anti-abortion, as vetted by the right-wing Federalist Society, instead of the American Bar Association, which has previously made professional assessments of nominees. The result of this Trump transaction with the white evangelical Christians and McConnell's Republican control of the U.S. Senate was the installation of Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, whose nomination hearings exposed his history as a violent sexual predator, and unhinged, aggressive personality. The Trump administration concealed the full extent of his disqualifications for any public office. Now we have a U.S. Supreme Court completely dominated by a 6-3 majority of Catholic Republican originalists, which means that they apply 18th century standards to jurisprudence without regard to over 200 years of constitutional and societal evolution. Thanks to Donald Trump and the Republican Party, we have a strong fascist movement in the United States, which threatens not only constitutional democracy in this country, it is in conflict with basic premises of Western civilization. This is not just about women's rights to have a safe abortion. These rights are collateral damage to a fascist, totalitarian political agenda led by a fascist political party that is opposed to democracy itself. The answer to this problem is clear. Democrats must win elections at every level, beginning with the United States Senate, the House of Representatives, the presidency, especially all state legislatures and state political offices, and all other political offices that are open and competitive. Thank you for your time and attention.
All right, that was the voice of Dr. Warren
is
Hearn.
a writer on the courts and the law for Slate.com.
Out of Boulder, Colorado. If you're just tuning in, you are listening to a special 2-hour broadcast of We Only Want the World with me, Sunsara Taylor, here at WBAI 99.5 FM in New York City and WPFW 89.3 FM in Washington, D.C., and streaming live online at refusefascism.org and youtube.com/therevcomes. With that, we want to look at the legal implications of this Texas abortion ban and the Supreme Court decision to consider another ban out of the state of Mississippi on December 1st, a 15-week abortion ban. To get into this, I did an interview with Dalia Lithwick. She is the writer for Slate.com, who covers the courts and the law, and she has really been tracking this over years, and so it's a pretty rich discussion. Let's go to that right now. And she is the host of Amicus podcast. We're so happy that you can join us here today for this town hall. Dalia, welcome.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk, for listeners who maybe are not familiar, Texas on September 1st made law the most extreme abortion ban in 50 years. 6 million women in Texas of reproductive age have been deprived of the ability to decide for themselves when and whether to have a child. And I wonder if you could just react to that law, what it means.
And let's do a little bit of the spade work. In 1973, the Supreme Court decides Roe v. Wade, locates in sort of privacy doctrine and the right to bodily autonomy, right? This follows on cases about contraception, Griswold versus Connecticut. The court decides that abortion is lawful throughout the country. And I'm sure your listeners know, massive decades-long backlash to that. Roe is reaffirmed in 1992 in Casey. The court slightly changes the test, but what they essentially do is they draw a line at viability. And that's been the law ever since. So for many, many years, states trying to do away with Roe enacted these so-called trap laws, right? Targeted regulation of abortion providers. And those were the kind of laws we got used to, right? You got to broaden the hallways in clinics so that two gurneys could go past each other, put in an HVAC system, sometimes would stipulate what it looked like outside the windows of clinics. And this was all ostensibly not to ban abortion, but to make it a pleasant and healthy experience for women. Of course, the object of all those laws was to close clinics, right? Because it's unbelievably onerous. And in the most recent case that went to the Supreme Court on this, in Whole Women's Health, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't just enact barriers to abortion. And Texas was the test. The testing grounds were after the trap law in Texas was imposed, about 3/4 of the clinics shut down. Okay, so that's where we were. Suddenly, Brett Kavanaugh takes Anthony Kennedy's seat on the court. Amy Coney Barrett takes Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat on the court. And now it's just open season. Now it's just, we're not going to pretend that we want women to make better choices, that we care about their health. We're going to just end abortion. And that's the kind of law that has led to this raft of, as you say, heartbeat bans. Those at 6 weeks are way pre-viability. They're flagrantly unconstitutional. Texas knows it's unconstitutional. But the point is to stop abortion. The reason the Texas law is different from the 15-week bans and the 8-week bans and the other bans we've seen is because for the first time, and this is the sort of deviously, fiendishly clever part, there's no one in Texas to sue because the law doesn't get enforced by state actors. The law is enforced by your neighbor and your garbage man and somebody in Idaho who thinks that you are having an abortion. So the woman is not punished. The provider is punished. That's the first thing. In a civil lawsuit that can be brought by anyone, the entire country is conscripted to bring a civil suit against the provider with this other really pernicious wrinkle that we're going to talk about, which is this bounty system, that if you aid and abet an abortion, or if you, quote, intend to aid and abet an abortion, you can be liable. And that's really the kind of fiendish part of this law, is that it makes it impossible to do what every other jurisdiction that had a 6-week ban or an 8-week ban or a 12-week or whatever, you just immediately enjoin it. You go to the courts and you name the state actor that would enforce it. And the courts say, of course, this is unconstitutional. So that's what's different about this. It was deliberately crafted to evade judicial review. And the roundabout sort of thing that the Supreme Court did is they, when faced with a request by the providers to enjoin this law, said, but nothing we can do, our hands are tied. And so as you note, and this is the important thing, the law goes into effect on September 1, and at midnight, all of the providers, except for somebody who just wrote a piece in the Washington Post, all of the providers stopped giving abortions at 6 weeks, 6-week, quote unquote, the fetal heartbeat. So you are exactly right. In the second most populous state in the nation, even though it is unconstitutional and Texas stipulates that it violates the Constitution, you cannot get an abortion after 6 weeks. And we've already seen horrifying outcomes for women as a consequence.
I think that's really important. And I want to ask more about this vigilante bounty dimension of it and the assault, really an open assault on the rule of law that I think has bigger implications. And I wonder if you could just take a minute on that.
So this is the reason that ultimately when the Supreme Court hands down the decision, the Supreme Court is, implored to get involved, waits 24 hours and hands down a 1.5-page unsigned opinion. We don't know who wrote it, but it's interestingly not 6-3. It's 5-4. Why? Because John Roberts, the Chief Justice, who is not a fan of abortion, who has in virtually every case been at pains to say he doesn't think abortion should be protected by the Constitution, he hives off and sides with the 3 liberal justices in dissent. And he goes so far as to write his own very pointed dissent, and it goes exactly to the question you just asked, the rule of law question. When we do things at midnight without analysis and we don't explain ourselves and we allow, in his view, this unprecedented law that sets the courts aside from review and says, there's nothing you can do, you cannot touch us, that encourages lawlessness. So in other words, what he's reacting to is exactly the thing I think you're surfacing in your question, which is the court really going to let any jurisdiction that wants to evade and elide judicial review just go ahead and do that? And the Chief Justice is affronted that this law was constructed deliberately to get around constitutional scrutiny. And it does raise the question, and he flicks at this in his dissent, not just the optics of doing something like this in the dark of night without reasoning. But really, like, this could now happen anywhere, right? New York could say, we're going to give you a bounty if you turn in your neighbor for gun possession. California could say, hey, anybody who speaks ill of Governor Newsom is going to be, you'll get a $10,000 bounty if you report them. Those are constitutionally protected rights. But if the system is designed exactly the way Texas designed their system, no court can stop it. And that is, as you're pointing out, really the end of the rule of law. It's also the end of, and this is sort of the basis of Joe Biden, of the Biden administration's lawsuit challenging Texas. It really does terrible violence to the supremacy clause and to the sort of role of the federal courts in protecting individual
can you just
rights.
explain the supremacy clause?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the notion that the Supreme Court and the federal courts and the federal constitutional rules can't be thwarted by state enterprises that would run against federal constitutional rules, and that this is a longstanding notion. It's not complicated, and the Texas law was built to do precisely that. The only other thing that I think is really of a piece with this, and I've written about this a few times, but I think it's not getting enough attention just in this bucket of rule of law concerns, is the problem of deputizing individuals to take the law into their own hands. And it shows both a kind of lack of faith in state actors, right? We're not going to let the state entities enforce the law. We're going to just let everyone make a decision about whether they think subjectively, because it's Tuesday, that someone is violating the ban. And the same day that SB 8 went into effect, Texas's vote suppression bill went into effect. And one of the things it is really permitting and in fact encouraging is for poll watchers and people who think that they're seeing illegal action at polling places to take the law into their own hands. And I just think, in addition to the sort of very meta problem you and I have been talking about, what does it mean to have the courts utterly sidelined? There's another move that is, I think, just as pernicious, which is conscripting every individual who thinks in the moment that a law is being violated to take action. And I think that's as lawless and really fundamentally as dangerous as writing the federal courts out of the picture.
I think that's very important, and it's something that is little understood. And I wanted to ask, I was going to ask it later, but I'll ask it now. I wanted to read something and get your reaction to it because I think it's touching on the same basic issue. This is from an article that was at revcom.us called Baba Vakian on the Law, Justice, and Ending Oppression and Exploitation. And it's analyzing important principles about the rule of law. And so this is just one passage. It says, the criminal legal process is not or should not be a contest between individuals, but a confrontation between the state and people whom the state seeks to deprive of freedom on the basis that they have violated societal norms that are embodied in criminal statutes. The whole point of a legal system is, or should be, to remove disputes or perceived wrongs from the sphere of individual grievance, and the corresponding attempts to settle such grievance through individual acts of revenge or reciprocal wrongdoing, by providing a framework in which society, through established institutions and statutes, which are to be applied and work equally in regard to all, can adjudicate such disputes or claims of wrongdoing. And I think this is supposed to be a leap in the rule of law and a legal system, is that it's not individual retribution, individual vigilantism. And I wonder if you're going right there. And I just think it's very important, very little understood. And maybe you want to say a little bit more about it.
No, I mean, that's a much more elegant articulation of the point I was making, which is, and by the way, I put things like stand your ground laws into this category, laws that essentially say, instead of relying on the superstructure of, the rule of law, and I say that with all of the doubts we have about policing and incarceration, I have no illusion that the systems we have constructed to quote unquote enforce the law are in any way adequate to our needs. But I think that the thing that is worse than that is deputizing everybody to be a vigilante. And the problem with stand your ground laws, right? We're seeing this with the Kyle Rittenhouse trial right now, is that everybody gets to say, it doesn't matter what the cops thought. It doesn't matter if there was an exigent need. It doesn't matter any of this. What matters is what I subjectively thought in the moment, and I thought I should start shooting. And I just think you are completely right. I think that, it's easier kind of cognitively to understand the move of kind of getting the courts out of the picture. That's very clear what was intended. But I think this move that's playing out, as you've just said, in so many contexts, in the voting context, in the gun context, that every person is a law unto themselves. And it really feels like a biblical arrangement, right? It's an eye for an eye. It's just, if I feel that I need to be avenged, there is no check on me. And I think it is absolutely foundational to a rule of law regime.
Let's return to the Supreme Court case that is coming, you said probably in December. There was a 15-week abortion ban out of Mississippi, a state where there's only one abortion clinic in the entire state. It has been blocked because it is blatantly unconstitutional. It's in violation of Roe versus Wade. But the Supreme Court agreed to hear it, which obviously means they're willing to reconsider Roe v. Wade, either altogether or in significant dimensions. So is there anything you think people need to understand about that?
The case is called Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. One of the things that Mississippi has asked for in the briefing in Dobbs is for Roe to be overturned. Doesn't happen. Usually states are very modest in their asks of the court. And as I said at the beginning, they do so under the guise of, we just want to help women make good choices. That is gone. All of the rhetoric around trap laws is gone. They just want it to be unconstitutional to have an abortion anywhere. And I think the thing that I see is that difference in the briefing. That what I'm seeing is the states absolutely emboldened to shoot for the moon, to ask for the whole thing. And that's why, and this is where we started, it is so shocking that the court decided to get involved in SB 8 and then let it stand. And if you read the dissents from both Justice Kagan and Justice Sotomayor in that SB 8 order from September 1st, they're saying on the ground, women are being turned away. This is what has happened in the 24 hours this law has gone into effect. Women are not getting constitutionally protected abortions. Like, they're waving their hand saying, this violates Roe. And so now that leads me to think that the states that are feeling emboldened to ask for the moon are feeling emboldened because they think they have 5 votes for it. And that is ground shifting. That means that a court that is well aware that it is a 6-3, very conservative supermajority, not aligned with public polling or the public mood on guns and on abortion and on voting, might just do it anyway, might just go big. And that's the thing that I see as a harbinger that the SB 8 decision is really signaling forward. And by the way, and I think this is important, the court has managed in a matter of weeks to shift the Overton window, right? Because we're going to get to Mississippi when Dobbs is argued, and we're going to look at ourselves and say, 15 weeks seems really generous next to Texas. And that's shocking, right? That's viability is 22 weeks, not 15, not 8. But the court has really managed to insert itself into a discourse that would normalize 15 weeks as utterly reasonable. And I think that those moves tell me that we really may see the thing that I never believed I would see, which is Roe overturned this coming spring.
Well, Dalia, I really want to thank you for making the time to talk with us, to get into the implications of the abortion ban, but also the bigger implications to the rule of law, the state of the courts. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
It was a total pleasure, and really thank you for it. It's incredibly meaningful and important to have long conversations, because this is not stuff that you can do justice to in 2 minutes. So thank you for really deep dive. I think it's absolutely urgently needed.
All right. Okay, so that was my interview with Dalia Lithwick, a writer for Slate.com who covers the courts and the law, and she is the host of Amicus, the podcast. As you heard her say at the end, she appreciated the deep dive, the long conversation. We weren't able to fit her entire interview into this broadcast tonight, this special broadcast town hall, but we will be airing it. I will be airing it next week on my regular 1 hour show. So tune in next week on WBAI and WPFW in DC. And if you're just tuning in or you've forgotten, we are doing a special 2 hour broadcast of We Only Want the World here tonight on WBAI 99.5 FM in New York City and WPFW 89.3 FM in Washington, DC on the abortion rights emergency. And we really are at an emergency moment, as I think you just heard from Dalia. This massive assault on the rights of women to access abortion in Texas have already been shut down for the majority of women, 6 million women of reproductive age there. And on December 1st, the Supreme Court will be hearing a direct challenge to Roe v. Wade, a direct case that could officially overturn abortion protections nationwide. It is urgent that people understand what's afoot and respond. This must not be allowed to go down. So that's what we are getting into tonight in this town hall. Before I move ahead and introduce our live guests for the round table portion of the town hall, I want to take just a moment and pay tribute to someone who is a strong voice for social justice and a very firm advocate for women's right to abortion and women's reproductive freedom all around. He is also an important figure in DC and very special to the WPFW station. And I'm speaking about Reverend Carlton Veazy. And one of the ways he's special to the DC station is he was the father, one of two fathers of Katia Stitt, our program director, who I hope is listening tonight. And I wanted to pay tribute to Reverend Carlton Veazy for his role. He passed away on August 10th. For his role in many things, but including standing up for abortion rights. I first met him personally back in the 1990s when I think I was probably still a teenager, just getting involved in the fight for abortion rights and becoming a revolutionary myself. And I met him, and he really stood out for seeing the connections between different dimensions of the assaults that were converging, some of the early rise of the fascist movement that congealed and coalesced in Trump and that we are now seeing behind these abortion bans today and in the Supreme Court right now. And he was also a firm voice in insisting that religious people stand up against an assault that is largely driven by Christian fascist fundamentalists, and that he saw an importance there. So I stayed in touch with him over the years, and I wanted to share something that was in a letter that he sent to me in 2009 that I think is really relevant and I wanted to bring into this town hall. It was in response to an article that I shared with him where I was taking on Obama's attempt to seek common ground with religious fascists, with Christian fascists and religious fundamentalists, in particular around the question of abortion. And so this is a quote from a note that he wrote me, Reverend Veazy. He said, "I think we do have to be very careful when we talk about common ground. I have been involved in meetings, seminars, and conferences where we attempt to find common ground. The problem is we failed to recognize that our positions are diametrically opposite, which means no manner of good. The problem is we failed to recognize that our positions were diametrically opposite, which means that no manner of goodwill can bridge that gap. As an African American, I would have been appalled if someone had suggested we try to find common ground with the segregationists, the bigots, and the like. It was unthinkable." And I really appreciate that, and I feel the same as was indicated in his letter, that you cannot find common ground between those who would reduce women to incubators, forcing them to have children against their will, and those who believe women are full human beings. So I appreciate that message. I wanted to share it here tonight and say, send my love to everybody who knew and cared about Reverend Veazy, and say he is presente this evening. And so we'll bring that point into our discussion as we move forward. I want to introduce the first guest who is part of our roundtable tonight. Michelle Chai is a leader in the Los Angeles Revolution Club, and she is currently one of the organizers of Break the Chains contingents that are going to be marching on October 2nd across this country in the marches that have been called by the Women's March, Planned Parenthood, a number of other women's organizations for reproductive rights, responding to this Texas abortion ban and the Supreme Court case coming before taking up the ban out of Mississippi. So I wanted to welcome you, Michelle, to We Only Want the World.
Thank you.
Michelle, I have kind of two themes I want to talk with you about to get us started. And one is, it's a bit more about your own personal development, which I think will bring a lot of insights to our listeners, which is that when you first met the revolution and got involved in the fight for a massive change, liberatory change, I know that it was around the struggle of Trayvon Martin and police murder and the white supremacy in this country, the vigilantism in that sense. And you were actually very, very opposed to abortion, morally and deeply. And you've changed tremendously on this. And I wonder if you could just share some of your own transformation, because I know a lot of people grow up hearing and believing that abortion is wrong, that it's shameful, that it's some kind of murder. And I think it'd be helpful for you to share some of your own transformation on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I grew up in a very Catholic home, and, where we just wouldn't talk about sexuality. We wouldn't talk about anything like that, and I had a best friend who was very anti-abortion, and that was the first time I had even heard about what an abortion even was, right? And the way it was put in my head was like, it's the murder of babies. And that just stayed with me, and in the same way that you're told not to question the Bible, you're told not to question, whether there's a God or not, you're told, then you don't question, like, what an abortion is or why it's wrong, And I remember, coming out of, school some days, and I would see these rabid anti-abortion people with the big signs that had what they claimed to be aborted fetuses that look like very small toy or looking, babies. And I was told, this is what these women, this is what an aborted fetus looks like, and this is the murder of babies. And so this is what I just went along believing, thinking that was just a bad thing to do, that basically coming down to the role of women is to be mothers and to have children, even if that's just not something that you question, that's just something you do. And at a certain point when you get to that point in your life when you get married and then you have children, and that's just what you do. And then I came around the Revolution Club when I was about 18, and I was very enraged around seeing the murder of Trayvon Martin, right? But then somebody very righteously struggled with me and challenged me on, okay, well, why do you say that an abortion is murder? And I could not answer that question. I had no evidence to back up. And it was actually the first time that I was told, show your work. Why do you say that abortion is murder? What evidence do you have for that? And I felt like that was the hardest question I had been asked, because I didn't have any evidence to back it up other than to say, that's just what you know, right? And around the same time, I was asked to back up the existence of a God. And I didn't know how to back that up either, other than holding up the Bible and saying it's in the Bible. You don't question that, And it was like such a big deal to me to even go home and think about, okay, like everything I've known about the role of women, basically, and what my role is in this world is to bring a child into this world, and that's the most that I can be, has just been put into question. And that like rocked my world. and this person that challenged me on this, when they brought this book by Ardea Skybreak, right, the Science of Evolution, right, and he just opened the book up with me and walked through, this is what a fetus looks like at this time, and this is what it looks like at this time, and this is how we've evolved. And to have, the thing that struck me was the little tail in the fetus, right? I was so struck by that because I never knew the science of it. I never knew. All I had in my head was a floating baby somewhere that was not connected to the women, that was not like, that was just there. And it was supposed to look cute and adorable and just ready to come out. Mm-hmm. And when that was shown to me, it changed my whole view on everything, And then when I was walked through how an abortion actually happens, when they showed me that an abortion most of the time happens when the fetus is the size of a dot on a piece of paper, that completely shattered my whole worldview on what an abortion is, on what a fetus is, on what even the question of is that the most that you as a woman can be in this society. It completely changed that. And it actually went along with, this quote from Baba Vakian around, you cannot break all the chains except one. Here I was arguing and very righteously enraged around, the murder of Black people, by police, and learning about the whole history of this country, but still holding on to these views that women have to just play this role as just women and the most that you can be in, that you can do as a woman in this society is have a family. I was holding on to that still and wanting to hold on to that. And once I was challenged around that, and once I actually learned more about the science of an abortion, it really did change. And actually more the question being, are women full human beings or not? That was the question that I had to confront, and actually, and whether women have, and if women don't have this right, what actually, you never told the history of women, getting back alley abortions. You never told that, seeing the images of that woman in the hotel room on her, dead on her belly, bleeding out, this is the reality of what women go through when they don't have abortions. And the question of whether or not women are going to be full human beings has everything to do whether or not they have the right to abortion. And that I had to confront that, and I had to, I had to switch sides, And even thinking about one of my best friends that at the age of 15, she became, she had a baby, because she was one of the people that was, very, much believed in this, idea that abortion was wrong. And this just completely changed her life.
I was going to ask you about that friend of yours because I've heard you talk about her before. Actually, never publicly, but I think it's important because you're exactly right. When abortion is unavailable, when it's illegal, when it's shamed, when women don't have anybody to turn to, which is the object of this Texas law, to criminalize anybody who'd even help or talk to a woman who's seeking an abortion. Women do die from illegal and unsafe abortions, but also women have their lives shattered by the weight of the patriarchal oppression in its many forms, and being forced to, look, if you want to have a child and you're ready for a child, it's a beautiful thing. It can be a beautiful thing for men as much as for women, and for people of all genders. But if you're forced to have a child against your will, or if you're not ready, it is crushing to your life, even if you live. And I think it'd be worth it for you to just talk for a moment about your friend and what that typifies.
Yeah, I mean, just even thinking about how many women or young girls in the society, have babies, being babies themselves, right? I mean, the whole culture around it too, the whole 16 and pregnant, all of this that just upholds this, and again, that just has this idea, ingrained in a lot of young women that this is the most that you do in your life, and the farthest thing from my mind was becoming a revolutionary communist and being about changing the whole world. And even as I didn't want to have children, and my friend also was was dreaming about moving to a whole nother city, was dreaming about going to college. We would talk about all these things all the time, and then she's stuck somewhere with a baby now, struggling, because the drama with the partner, or ex-partner. And on the other hand, I had another friend who, at the time when I was going back and forth around struggling with myself around this question, she tells me she was going to go have an abortion, and I tried to convince her not to do it. because I still thought it was wrong, you know, and she had kids already, and she said, I can't do this, I can't have a third child. She cried at me, and she said, I'm gonna go have an abortion. And I look back on that, and I'm glad she did. You know, I'm really glad she got an abortion. At the time, I thought it was wrong, but now looking at it and actually thinking about, and even thinking about, you know, all these women, you know, in Texas, right, that are literally pleading the way that my friend pleaded at me, you know, to help her get an abortion, like how in a desperate situation that they're in, because they don't want to bring a child into this world that they don't want. And even this thing of like, if this is something that they want to do and it's planned, and it can be a very beautiful thing and a very happy thing, right? But not when it's forced, you know, against their will, you know? And this is like, you know, just thinking about all of those experiences and the millions of women that have to, you know, that have this idea that this is all that they can be in life, that this is the greatest thing that they can do is form a family and be a mother, right? But now this is going to be forced on them if this is allowed to go down, right? And for all those, you know, young girls that are out there thinking about, how do I understand this? I've met several of them being out, you know, in the college campuses, in the neighborhoods of the oppressed with this, you know, with the revolution, where they are trying to understand it. They don't know, like, even how their body works. They don't know how, you know, they don't understand it. They don't understand the science of an abortion. They're not, when you're told to question that, it completely, like, it's such a big deal, you know, when you're actually having to do the work and understand how does an abortion work, what, you know, all of that. How does your own body work?
Yeah. I think we'll come back to some of this in the roundtable when we get the other guests in, but I want to ask you one more question before we get our next guest in the conversation, which is, you are organizing now these contingents at this march on October 2nd. Called Break the Chains. And I wonder if you could talk some about that and why you're organizing them, what the Revolution Club is aiming to do, and how people would connect with that and why they should.
So these October 2nd marches, you know, we're going to have a contingents within them, right? Everybody who cares about, you know, right now the attacks, you know, on the right to abortion should be at one of these marches, wherever you are, right? And we're going to have these contingents within them. Break the Chains contingent, unleash the fury of women as a mighty force for revolution. And, you know, and we're calling on people to be there, you know, to not just let this be a one day of symbolic protest and then going home, but the beginning of determined resistance to actually, like, you know, force them to back down from this law and actually stop them from making this a national, you know, a thing where they get rid of abortion, right? And in the Revolution Club, we're fighting for a whole different world where we can actually put an end to the oppression of women as a part of putting an end to the oppression of all people everywhere. We need a revolution. We need to overthrow this whole system, you know? One of the slogans is actually patriarchy and capitalism. You cannot end one without ending the other. We need revolution, nothing less. And this is, you know, together with the other very powerful slogans, you know, that as part of our contingent, right? No going back, no surrender, abortion on demand and without apology. Forced motherhood is female enslavement. Christian fascist theocrats, get your laws and vigilantes off our bodies. We need powerful contingents that are loud, that are lively, and that are representing a whole different future and are fighting to actually, you know, not allow this to go down, you know, and calling on all those people, you know, that are out there that were like me 10 years ago, that were questioning, you know, how do I understand this? The question being, are women going to be full human beings or not? And people actually picking a side on that. And that's what these, you know, that's why we're calling on these contingents to, you know, people from all walks of life to actually come together and march in these contingents and on the day itself, right?
And how would people, if they're interested, get in touch with you on that?
So people should DM us at the RevComs, and people should tune in to revcom.us, where there will be a page where people can download stickers and posters and t-shirts. So wherever you're at in the country, if you have a few friends that you want to pull together, go on that website, sign the form. We're going to have a form up pretty soon that you can sign up, and we can link you up with other people in your area. If you're in New York City, contact the New York City Revolution Club. Wherever you're at, contact the Revolution Club. Be out there, look out for the materials up on the revcom.us website and sign up and let's go together in the streets.
All right, well, Michelle, stick around. We're going to keep going with the roundtable, and then we'll bring everybody into conversation together. I want to invite now Sam Goldman, who is on the editorial board of refusefascism.org, and she is also the host of the Refuse Fascism podcast. Sam, are you there? Welcome to We Only Want the World.
Thank you, Sunsara. Thank you so much for doing this program, and thanks to WBAI, WPFW for bringing this to more people. This is a really urgent conversation to be having, so I'm glad to be with you.
Good, good. Well, we're really glad you're with us too. So, listen, we've heard a lot already. So I wanted to ask you to situate this attack on abortion rights, in what Refuse Fascism has come together and exists to expose and oppose, which is the consolidation of fascism in this country. So we've kind of talked about, and you're welcome to add to each of these things, but we've talked a little bit about abortion being an assault on women's lives and women's rights. And this attack on abortion, Dalia Lithwick talked about this a lot, in terms of the way these attacks have come down being an assault on the rule of law. And I think maybe you could react to that, build on that, but also put that in the larger picture of a rising fascism in this country.
Yeah, I think it's both. It is a power grab right now that we're seeing, that the end game in terms of what it means for women and those who seek abortions is not just the end of abortion. It is the end game of fetal personhood and the subordination of women. And that is part of the whole fascist assault that we're seeing. And that includes, voting rights, as Dahlia brought up. It also includes marriage equality. In fact, the architects of the Texas ban played a big role in seeking to undo marriage equality. So I'm gonna probably echo some things that Dahlia said, and Dr. Hearn, I'm gonna start with actually. In the words of Dr. Hearn, the anti-abortion movement is the face of fascism in the United States. This is a movement that's centered on a political program of white supremacy, the subjugation of women, theocracy, and a form of rule enforced by fear and coercion. And it's a movement with a mass base, organized and funded by elite sections of society. There's the alt-right, the Proud Boys, and the 3%ers. There's QAnon, and there's Trump. But before all of that, there was the anti-abortion movement. And I know Sunsara knows full well, spending decades face to face up against them. This is a movement that has terrorized women at clinics for decades. This is a movement that has killed abortion providers and bombed clinics. It's a movement that mobilized for decades massive marches of people indoctrinated to see women as breeders of children and the property of men. And this is the movement that was a key organizing force behind the rise of Trump and Pence into the White House, and bestowed power to a regime that then stacks the courts with Christian fascist judges. Yeah, I'm talking about the Supreme Court, that Amy Coney Barrett, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, that Dr. Hearn spoke to, but also unprecedented amount of federal judge appointments. Really Christian fascist across the board. These are people that go against Brown versus Board of Education fascists, and now these are courts that are poised to strip away the basic right to abortion. To speak to the role of women in the assault of women, whether we are to be more than breeders of children, has been one of the touch points of what we see as a so-called modern society or not. And when we think about Trump's quote unquote, make America great again, that was by definition harking back to some other time, some earlier time when society was ordered the so-called right way. And I think it's very important that we're clear that this right way for them is pre-Civil War greatness. That's what they want to reclaim, where whole sections of people are deemed as subhuman. So Trump, people are thinking he's not in power anymore. What are you talking about this for? Well, 74 million people voted for him in 2020. And we're faced with a Republican-fascist party that's been purged of all dissenting voices. We're talking about a mass fascist movement that's hardened post the January 6th coup. And we see in Texas, as one acute example, efforts to restrict voting, to attack immigrants, and the right to abortion being rapidly advanced. And this is just one of the state houses. You know, there's several states that are pushing through copycat laws to do what Texas has done. Florida is one example of that. And so it's clear, you know, in my opinion, and the opinion of others with refused fascism, that the election of Biden in this regard has not eliminated the danger. It's really only bought time. And I've used the word fascism a lot, and Dr. Hearn did as well. And so I just want to situate in what we mean by that. It's not the best.
Sam, let me just jump in for one moment because we reached the top of the hour, and I want to let everybody who is tuning in know that we're extending our special broadcast of We Only Want the World tonight on WBAI and WPFW in DC. And we're doing a special town hall edition on the abortion rights emergency. You're hearing Sam Goldman of refusefascism.org right now. I'm in studio with Michelle Chai of the Los Angeles Revolution Club. Tony Redtree will be talking to soon, who is a writer for revcom.us. And earlier we heard, as Sam was just referencing, Dr. Warren Hearn, abortion doctor out of Boulder, and Dalia Lithwick, who writes about the law in the courts for Slate.com. And we're really going deeply into the Texas abortion ban, the Mississippi abortion ban that the Supreme Court is going to be considering on December 1st that could overturn abortion protections nationwide, this emergency confronting women and what the stakes are for women, but really for all of humanity, and what is to be done. So if you're just tuning in, welcome. We're also broadcasting live online at refusefascism.org and youtube.com/therevcoms. And with that, I want to go back to Sam and let you finish your walkthrough on what is fascism, because it's very important to talk about this. It's a word that gets thrown around all the time, but it has meaning. And so I'm glad you're going there. Please continue.
Exactly. So we're talking about a qualitative change in how society is governed, not the worst insult that can be slung. Once in power, and this is what we think is the most essential, is that the defining feature is the essential elimination of the rule of law and democratic and civil rights. So what this looks like, and you know what you can see today, is the moves to restrict people's rights to vote, the right to dissent, which we see being criminalized across the country, and any avenue of redress, and yes, the right to abortion. Which is essential to the ability of people to fully participate in society, to have control over their lives and destiny, as Sunsara spoke about earlier. And when you're looking at fascism, you're looking at a movement that obliterates the truth, right? As Michelle was talking about, the truth that a fetus isn't a baby, right? And fascist mobs and threats of violence are unleashed to build the movement and consolidate power. And that's what both Sunsara and Dalia were talking about when you're talking about deputizing people, really fostering a culture of mass vigilantism. And the law is shredded, as we're seeing the total disregard of the Constitution in Texas, you know, or rewritten, as they're trying to do with Dobbs, as a means to terrorize and rule by brute force. And I think Anthea Butler said this on a previous episode of the Refuse Fascism podcast. I'm paraphrasing here. in what she calls white Christian evangelical, she said, these people aren't some moral force. They are a political force who use morality as a bludgeon. And that's what we're seeing. And taking this right away from women is crucial to bringing about the kind of society that these fascists want to cement in place. And that looks like white supremacy, male supremacy, Christian supremacy, and American supremacy, where they're unquestioned and unchallenged. And they're trying to do this through legal means right now, but they are prepared to use extra legal means and whatever levels of violence they need to take down whatever wall exists between church and state. This is what we mean when we say theocracy. And to take down whatever level of protections that have been won through the great struggle, including, women taking to the streets for the right to abortion in the first place. They want to take all that back and shatter the rule of law and force all-out fascism. And I think this Texas law, in this sense, further intensifies how acute and immediately posed it is that this is going to be resolved one way or another. And just to repeat, this is a fascist movement. It's aided by a fascist majority Supreme Court, fascist Trump-appointed federal judges across the country, and a rabid base of millions. And it's a party that has been purged its ranks of anyone who didn't go along with the big lie, anyone who didn't want to use fascist violence and voter suppression to outright lock in permanent fascist minority rule. And so that's how I see this all connected.
Well, I think, Sam, that's really, there's a lot there in terms of the picture that you're painting, and this is not the so-called, we're constantly told, the pendulum swing. What you are talking about is the buildup of a fascist movement, the implantation of fascist judges. I think I just heard the statistic given that Donald Trump was able to appoint more federal judges than any president ever since George Washington, who everybody should note appointed the most judges because he was the first one appointing them. This is unprecedented, and it is the dead hand of Donald Trump's legal structure. And then this mass fascist base and a purged Republican Party. So people have to reckon with that, and I think we should hold that in our minds as we continue this roundtable. We'll come back to it and what's required in the face of that. I want to bring Tony Redtree into the conversation. Tony is a writer for revcom.us. She recently, just yesterday, published 2 major and very important pieces on this abortion rights emergency, which we'll bring in a minute, taking on a lot of the very poor, not wise, but very poor, dangerous, deadly counsel from institutions like the New York Times on how we should respond to this emergency. We'll get to that. And Tony is also a follower of the revolutionary leader, Baba Veaky. And Tony, welcome to We Only Want the World.
Thank you so much. I feel like we're really building speaker by speaker an understanding of what's going on here. So it's very important.
Yeah, I do too. One of the things that Sam touched on at the end actually keys right up against something I wanted to start with you on, which is, I know you've written about it. We recently discussed it in an episode of the Revolution Nothing Less show, and I think it bears returning to repeatedly, and mining. It's very rich understanding. So I wanted to read this quote that touches on what Sam said about a resolution, one way or the other. This is a quote from Baba Veaky, from the revolutionary leader, from over 35 years ago, analyzing what then was a very acute fight over the position and role of women in society. And I'm going to read it and let you react to it as it's become even more intense and acute, and now we're right in the crux of it. So he wrote, over the past several decades in the U.S., there have been profound changes in the situation of women and the relations within the family. In only 1 of 10 families is there the, quote, model situation where the husband is the, quote, sole breadwinner and the wife a totally dependent, quote, homemaker. With these economic changes have come significant changes in attitudes and expectations, and very significant strains, not only on the fabric of the family, but of social relations more broadly. The whole question of the position and role of women in society is more and more acutely posing itself in today's extreme circumstances. This is a powder keg in the U.S. today. It is not conceivable that all this will find any resolution other than in the most radical terms and through extremely violent means. The question yet to be determined is, will it be a radical reactionary or a radical revolutionary resolution? Will it mean the reinforcing of the chains of enslavement or the shattering of the most decisive links in those chains and the opening up of the possibility of realizing the complete elimination of all such forms of enslavement?
So there's a lot there to dig into, more than we can do, in this panel. But I wanted to just pick up on the point of what's yet to be determined. Is this going to be a radical reactionary and very horrible resolution, or an actual radically emancipating one? And, just to speak hopefully briefly on the first, because I'd like to get past that to what's actually possible. But the Texas laws actually really do concentrate a lot about, I think, where we're at on this. And, you can see it in kind of the, what's been building throughout the whole program. So I don't have to go through and actually explain a lot of that. But I want to say to the people who are actually sitting in California and New York that it's really terrible, and maybe I'll send some money to Planned Parenthood so that people can come to California or New York for an abortion. You don't get it. We're looking at a situation where everything that Samantha just raised about how they've packed the courts on this and what's the actual agenda of the Christian theocrats who are actually been pushing this from the beginning and have gotten quite far on this is actually to eliminate abortion completely. One of the things that they're actually moving on to next, which is something that that one of the justices is pushing, Clarence Thomas, is basically a fetal personhood act under the 14th Amendment, which would actually make it illegal in the whole United States. So I think this is the direction things are going. And one of the things I was actually kind of reflecting on in the last week is because you read, people saying, "Oh my God, they're like, they're actually outlawing abortion even in cases of rape and incest," and it just people who are rational human beings are kind of looking at this and just kind of, it just seems so crazy, But what is it? Just think about what this actually means. Think of the violence of this. Think of the intended cruelty in it. But also, what does it mean when before Roe was passed, in most states, they had provisions that were exemptions for what? For the life of the mother, for her health if it wasn't really in big danger, for cases of rape, incest, and fetal abnormality, which is all the things that they've actually moved on just now in this recent period. And you're actually saying that the sperm of a rapist or an uncle or an older brother or a father has more legal standing than a woman. And what happens to her for the rest of her life on this? And if you read the accounts in the last week from abortion doctors that are basically talking about what's going to happen to their clientele, which includes 11-year-olds that people bring in for abortions. And we know just how rampant these things in our society. Just think of the violence of that. And the fact that actually what this is really all about is, as Michelle has been speaking out, is not about babies. It's about really the forceful, control of women. And in particular, the violent and aggressive assertion of male supremacy. So I think that, we have to kind of take stock of where we're at in terms of the radical resolution we want to avoid in this, because this is actually, people have to wake up to the fact that this is where things are heading. So that's on one side of it, and I think on the other side of it is, is there something out of these extremes that we could rip for humanity that actually would be, these are such radically different visions of freedom and what it means to be a human being. And what's a life worth living, and we're now, sitting in a country that's two countries in one, where people just, there's no reconciling these things, and I think one of the things that is in this declaration that's been put out that it's a call to get organized for an actual revolution. And the work that Baba Vakian has been doing, analyzing this whole period, is, you have not had a situation for 150 years that's actually been like this. It's really like feels like you're living in the pre-Civil War days, with one section actually actively organizing for this, and the broad masses of people not doing nearly enough to actually understand and deal with this. And this is kind of the point you raised at the beginning of the level of struggle and resistance around this is way too low. It's way too quiescent for what's actually really coming down here. But the other side of it is that this is really revealing the fact that actually the society that's been run this way for 150 years, it can't be held together anymore this way. There's a society that's really ripping apart, and there's, as Samantha laid out, there's a fascist mass movement around this, but this has also been led from forces on top of society and the ruling class who've really decided that the social composition of the country is changing. It's their last chance. They actually think the only way you can run this imperialist empire is actually through just straight up outright fascism, where you actually just get rid of, fundamental rights and civil rights, democratic rights. This is, they're intending to run things through minority rule. This is a situation actually that, is on one hand very dire, and on the other hand, the fact that you have an empire that actually is got these kinds of divisions at the top of society means that you could be looking at a situation where you would have a revolutionary situation in a country like this if the forces who actually want to see a different future get organized now for this, and begin and fighting these fascists and defeating them, including knocking things back like this, are a part of actually getting ready for an actual revolution. And then the other point I just wanted to make on this is, given that this is hosted by the RNL show, and all of us here on this panel in front of the camera right now are followers of BA. This is somebody who's really singular in the world, who's actually the architect of a new communism, which basically means, he's looked at the whole first stage of revolutions that happen in this country that actually came to an end in the world. Yeah, not in this country, but in the whole world. And did a very rigorous interrogation of those, and actually kind of, it's a continuation of the scientific understanding of Marxism, but also, interrogating where those things actually kind of went off their scientific foundation and putting them back on. And, and really, this is a revolutionary movement that's actually has, being led by leadership who has a plan and a strategy, but also a vision of what a new society could be. And we'll get into this later, but, one of the things that I kind of, made a point in the article that I just wrote is, what kind of society has, has people who are just, unleashing these, this zombie apocalypse of vigilantes and, and bounty hunters on one side, and then on the other side of it is, a section of the ruling class that actually isn't doing anything about this and has no answer for any of these things, and is really counseling people to just, put their heads down and, rely on the institutions, and maybe 40 years down the road you'll get your rights back. But what kind of society puts the fundamental rights of women or anybody up for a vote, which is really what's happened with this Texas thing, And one of the things that I think is really important is when you're talking about an actual revolution, you're talking about actually getting rid of all those old institutions that actually serve and protect and extend capitalism and its ability to actually exploit and oppress people. You can't use those institutions. And you can't rely on them now, but in particular, you can't use them. Once you've made a revolution, you have to actually uproot all those things and get new institutions and I think one of the big distinctions is A new state power has institutions, and in this case, a constitution written by Veazy that actually puts its force behind ensuring that those people who've been exploited and oppressed actually have fundamental rights that are built right into the Constitution and all the institutions from the outset. And I just wanted to read some things from this Constitution that he's written. It says, "The oppression of women arose together with the emergence of exploited class divisions among human beings thousands of years ago, has carried forward and been deeply entrenched in all societies ruled by exploiting classes, and was a marked feature of the imperialist United States of America and its domination and influence in the world. Abolishing and uprooting all this is one of the most important objectives of the new socialist republic in North America." And then it goes on and explicitly lays some of what that means out. "The new socialist republic in North America gives the highest priority not only to establishing and giving practical effect to full legal equality for women, and to basic rights and liberties that are essential for the emancipation of women, such as reproductive freedom, including the right to abortion as well as birth control, but also to the increasing and increasingly unfettered involvement of women equally with men in every sphere of society, and to propagating and popularizing the need for and the importance of uprooting and overcoming all remaining expressions and manifestations of patriarchy and male supremacy in the economic and social relations and in the realms of politics and ideology and culture." And then it goes on to say, "The orientation, policies, and laws flowing from this shall be applied, promoted, encouraged, and supported with the full political, legal, moral force, authority, and influence of the government at all levels in the new socialist republic in North America." So I think, the point is, this system of capitalist imperialism stands as a very direct obstacle to meeting any of the needs of humanity at this point. Mm-hmm. It's the obstacle that's standing in the way. And if out of this crisis, a revolution could be made in the most powerful country in the world, which is actually possible, getting to actually an entirely different road and place where humans could actually construct a society that actually could begin, where the force of society and its state apparatus and all the institutions are all about actually achieving equality and uprooting and getting rid of all the things that are kind of left over. What looks like could be the end of humanity, if this system actually continues its stranglehold on the rest of the world, could actually get to a whole different stage of human emancipation.
I think, look, I want us to work with this some, because I agree with your very first comment too, that there's been a building in the conversation today of what we face in Texas, what we face with the Supreme Court, the bigger picture of what that's part of in terms of a rising fascist movement in this country that is, you're talking about the dark ages, the going backwards, and as you're talking about the times from pre-Civil War, I cannot get, I hope, anybody who's seen it should not be able to get it out of their heads, the image of the Border Patrol with their whips out, horse whips out against Haitian asylum seekers at the U.S. border. And this one that came out today I saw that's whipping Black people from a horseback at the Texas border, shouting at them about how they treat women at the Texas border, where you just enslaved women and turned them into incubators, and pointing the finger as after hundreds of years of treating Black women as chattel property to be legally raped and quote unquote bred, that more concentrates the ugliness of the history of this country and the danger of what we're facing, what they really mean, make America great again, what they really mean to go back to. So I think that's the one picture. But what you brought in, I think, is very important, because precisely this is a time when there's so many dystopian novels and zombie apocalypse. Everybody can imagine the end of the world. But very few people have a vision of bringing something beautiful and liberating into being. And I think what you're drawing from the Declaration, from the RevComs, which people can find at revcom.us, and from the work Veazy has been leading, is to see not only a revolution could emancipate humanity that overthrows the system, but out of these very extreme times, There's not a guarantee, it's not going to be a cakewalk, but out of these very extreme times where the norms are being shattered and there is no return to normal, there is the possibility if people lift their sights and dare to get organized and serious about it and scientific about it, to wrench a real revolution and a beautiful future. For real. And that's a big idea, which I think it would be good for us to talk more about, but also to connect it to this moment where in the context of this larger crisis you're describing, there is a major flashpoint in this battle over abortion, which is coming to a head with the December 1st Supreme Court case. And there are protests being called on October 2nd, which is very important. Everybody has given voice to this in different ways, that people should be out in the streets on October 2nd for these marches. But it can't just be a one-off. It can't just be what has way too much characterized the whole period where fascism has been on the rise, where the people who care about women, the people who care about the rights of the oppressed, the people who hate white supremacy and police terror, the people who care about the rights of LGBTQ people, the people who understand and fight for science in relation to the virus, the pandemic, and in relation to the climate, are way too passive, and the people who want to steamroll and bury all that are armed to the teeth, rabid, out there fighting and changing laws and shattering lives and aggressively moving forward. They staged an insurrection attempt on January 6th. So this situation has to be reversed. So I want to open up to have some discussion with all of you together now, where we look at why is the side of the half the country that cares about these rights, that does not want to go back to this dark ages, slam women back, and everything else bound up with it. Why is there such quiescence? Why is there such calm? And what needs to be changed in people's understanding and flowing from that their behavior, such that we could wrench a beautiful future out of this? And I know we've been talking already, but I want to throw that first to you, Tony, if you want to speak some about that.
There's a lot of reasons for that. And actually, it would be really important to hear from listeners if they want to put things in the chat on why they think that's the case. And I don't think it's the only reason, but I think one reason is that there's been a lot of counsel from the representatives of those who rule this country on the Democratic side of the ledger, for people to actually chill. You know what I mean? And there's a article I wrote for RevCom today, which maybe you could read the New York Times.
Oh yeah, so I brought this because you did respond to this, the editorial board of the New York Times, which does think that women should not be deprived of their right to abortion. That is the side of this divide they're on, and yet here is what they wrote. This is a quote from your article, but it's a quote from the editorial board. For the majority of Americans who support a woman's right to comprehensive reproductive health, the Supreme Court is now an adversary. Any long-term success will mean fighting in the same way anti-abortion campaigners have for decades, in the political realm, by winning elections at the state and federal levels and changing laws as a result. Unlike justices, elected leaders can be voted out if they don't listen to their constituents. It is a long and difficult road, but is the one that all lasting reforms in a democracy must take. And I'll underline long. And in your article, you coupled this with another interview from a major legal leader in the fight for abortion rights, who said, look, it's going to be a 40-year battle to slowly fight to restore the rights of women. So go ahead.
And the first answer to that was, how many women are you willing to sacrifice, whose lives are going to be foreclosed, and people have spoken eloquently to that. So I'm actually not going to go on at length on that. But the other thing is, this is a strategy. It's a loser. It's we're living at a time where we're working with institutions that, and while the Democrats are arguing, look, we just have to follow the rules. We have to, we have to uphold the very institutions that the Christian right and the fascist movement and all those people who are actually now control the Republican Party, as Sam was laying out, they're blowing up those institutions and the rule of law. They can say this on one hand, and on the other hand, they're passing Jim Crow legislation, all over the country at this point. I mean, that's what it is. It's dragging people back to that period, where they're taking away people's rights and planning to rule through minority rule. So relying on those kinds of elections is a very dicey prospect, exactly because of the way in the electoral college, the Senate, all these things are actually products of kind of a compromise around slavery. And, and right down to today, they actually favor, the people who are flying Confederate flags in the Capitol right now, So I think that's one point, And as much as I appreciate a lot of what Warren laid out, with a really astute analysis of actually what's going on here and the move towards fascism, the history of the country, and especially his point about dragging us back to the 4th century, which I think both he and Dahlia made. When it gets to solutions, most people actually kind of just go there because they actually don't really envision what it is to actually work outside them, which is true for if anybody who wants to make fundamental change. But it's also true in general in terms of the history of this country or even what's going on in the world right now. Abortion rights actually were a product of an entire period in the 1960s of a generation of people who are actually defying laws, who are creating kind of a multi-front political crisis that the ruling class, for both economic reasons but also, how they looked in the world. In other words, they were fighting, communism in the rest of the world and trying to show that they were a democratic country, and it didn't look so good when you actually had, whole sections of people were living without any kind of rights at all, black people, women. Plessy versus Ferguson got reversed in 1954, and then it was another 10 years of them refusing to actually implement any of those laws until students went in and broke them and defied them, sat at lunch counters and in the backs of buses. And, it provoked a whole decades of struggle around this where people were just out of the box. They weren't actually kind of looking to, there were people who were working on that, but the people who were at the cutting edge of making the change, weren't actually relying on working inside those institutions and the slow process of being able to elect somebody, And I think this is, it's worth looking around the world right now, too, because, there's been this gigantic women are out of the box all over the world, and they're refusing to go back. You know what I mean? It's like the women in Afghanistan are out in the streets. They're shutting down schools and, and
At great risk.
At great risk, at great risk. And, and they're, you see these students who are male who are standing with them. You know what I mean? This is, or look, one of the questions I asked in the article is, what makes people think as we're losing our rights here and the quiescence that you see? How do you compare that? What's gone on in Latin America and the fact that in one of the largest Catholic countries in the world, they've actually had to grant abortion rights from the Supreme Court in Mexico. And, having read about this a little bit, even in the last few days, there were people who were actually doing a lot of that slow legislative work after it was granted in Mexico City. But everything changed in 2019 when women who had just had it with a kind of, vengeance that's actually come at women because they're actually been drawn into society and work and, in ways they never were before. Where people went into the streets and basically said, we're not putting up with femicide. Mm-hmm. That's just been rampant in those countries and around the world. And, standing up for abortion rights and just raising the roof, you know what I mean? It's just, in the streets relentlessly, taking over buildings, challenging all the institutions, graffiti, on all the official institutions, they, very, really relentless mass struggle that's gone on. And, one of the things that somebody I was listening to the other day was talking about is that it changed the entire political climate in the country. It changed minds. It shifted the balance in terms of, what the tipping point of how people had looked at this before. And it's still very hard fought. They're anticipating a lot of retrenching in the states and people kind of, coming back at this. And it's very controversial in the medical profession where some people are opting out as conscientious objectors who are refusing to do this. And the Supreme Court is, trying to consider how do you address that? How do you make sure that abortion is actually provided in the public hospital? So it's, everywhere. It's not just here. There's a question of what's the future going to be. But I think, one of the things that's pointed to in our declarations around what's the potential for revolution is you see that in what's happened with people all over the world doing this. Mm-hmm. You saw this, in the beautiful uprising last summer. A lot of what it does is it changes the minds of people that are really one of the most important things that achieves, right? In terms of what you're trying to transform. Whether, how do you rip away even people who actually are hardened or not as hardened but exist on the other side, especially a lot of the younger people, that changes in the course of an actual mass mobilization and uprising. And, instead what you've had is this strategy that's been going on for years that I think you can talk more about because you've had a lot of experience with this, where really in the name of winning elections, you have to go make a compromise with what the actual more backward things in the social base of the Republican Party are. And, this has been the centrist strategy ever since Clinton, where basically they said, abortion, that's really something should be legal, but it should also be rare. Where they just conceded away the actual moral questions that were involved and public opinion on this, and they've not really wanted to throw down on the fact that these are actual fundamental rights for women. Mm-hmm. Because you follow a strategy like this has actually got us to where we are now.
I think this does relate to the radical resolution in one way or the other. You literally do have half the country is rabidly or a powerful minority, but with power and with a fascist mobilized base is going for all-out theocracy, all-out white supremacist rule. You, Tony and Sam were talking about ending and discarding democratic rights, ending democratic rights, which is true. It's a part of fascism. Also ending whole sections of people, which they're really out to we saw the beginnings of this with the massacres that went on an uptick against immigrants, against Jewish people, all of this kind of thing under Trump. These people they're going for a radical remaking. So we see that. And I think and I want to bring this to you, Sam, on the other side of the ruling class, you have the Democrats who, they don't share all that fascism, but they really don't want to fight that. They don't want the upheaval that comes from that, and they don't want the upheaval that is required to beat that back, that I think has really, their council of common ground, their council, and I would just put this to you, Sam, for, both, I think you and Tony both referenced, I came alive to political life in the 90s with the killing of abortion doctors. And this, I've watched, I've been involved in this, I've watched over decades. I can remember 25 years ago going to a major conference for abortion rights, and people talking about how they're gonna do underground abortions when it's illegal. And talking about over and over again, people finding schemes, the whole network of abortion funds, which has grown up and which does life-saving work for many women who can't access abortions where they are, where the laws have restricted it. But what they're trying to do is help get women to other states. What has been missing this whole time is a political fight. The kinds of things that Tony is talking about that we've seen in Mexico, where women just raising hell in the streets and they won this right. It's not secured yet. There's further to go. But why is it going in one direction there and a different direction here? I think this is a big part of the picture. And I know that you have been working on this. Refuse Fascism, which I've worked with you in, has been trying to wake up the side of society to not keep playing by the rules when the rules are stacked against you, are being discarded, and huge stakes for the future of humanity, for women and for different sections of people. So I wonder if you just want to share how you see what is holding people back and what you think is needed right now.
Yeah, so I don't want to repeat anything that Tony said. I think she got into a lot of the dynamics of a culture of conciliation, a culture of training people to wait and see at the peril to humanity. I do want to make sure that I do put out there that those who are listening to this and are in need of abortion services, do check out needabortion.org. To speak to your question, 80% of people openly, the number might be higher actually, I think, do not want to see Roe reversed. But as you said, they are silent. You know, they're silent in the sense that right now we have bounty hunters going after doctors, and the streets of Texas are not filled with people demanding abortion on demand without apology. We have, we're weeks away from the highest court in the land taking the right of abortion away. Not to be predictive here, but they showed their hands. They told you what they were going to do when they sat out of Texas, and they said, go right ahead, basically. And the streets aren't filled. There was actually a question of whether or not there was going to be a women's march. People are saying, well, December 1st, they're going to hear the case, so we'll protest on December 1st. No way. No way. I was in the streets with Sunsara wearing a handmaid's cloak when Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed. And I remember being like, where the heck is everybody?
That's right.
That we were a small handful. And I am so proud of the people I was with, and that is not to discount them, but it should have been tens of thousands. And what happened then, to echo something that Tony said, is people were told, wait for the election. It didn't matter that they were running roughshod the rule of law and ramming through the appointment. It didn't matter. Wait, we're gonna get in the White House and things will be different. Well, now you have a fully compliant fascist Supreme Court, and it would have made a difference. It would have, there's the lessons that we learn of the other places across the world, what happens when people take the street, but there's also the lessons of what happens when we don't. And there was a huge, huge price that we're paying, that we subordinated the lives of women and others who need an abortion to the interests of the Democratic Party, and listened to those who were telling us, coaching us in civility and coaching us in patience, instead of going out and waging a full-throated fight. And right now is the time to be in the streets, to use whatever platform we have to wage that fight. To be very specific about what the Democrats are doing, because I think that that's important, is right now they're telling you, and the movements that are arms of the Democratic Party are telling you to tell Congress to pass the Women's Health Protection Act. And while the Women's Health Protection Act may pass in the House, there's no way it will pass in the Senate. You have Biden, people are calling for an end to the filibuster. You have Biden telling you it will rip the country apart. And by that, not saying we'll do it because we want part of this country is fascist and they need to go. No, he's saying we can't do it. We need to come together. We need unity. And there can be no unity with fascists except on the terms of the fascists. And so You know, that 80%, it's time that we're out in the street, that we're visible, that we're vocal, that we're saying, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America, abortion on demand without apology. Get your fascist laws and vigilantes off our bodies.
Michelle, I knew it would happen. We were going to run out of time faster than we wanted, and there's so much to talk about. But I want to ask you, Michelle, I think Tony brought alive, and Sam has as well, built on in many ways, the plain historical, undeniable fact that all the advances that have been made for the oppressed in the history of this country have not been won, like the New York Times says, through the slow, patient process of winning elections. But when people step outside of the channels of this system, the terms set by those who rule over us, and what is deemed realistic. Bob Avakian has this other quote I want to bring in that I think so captures what we're facing. He says, the politics of the possible are the politics of monstrosity. And when you go with what's politically realistic within the terms the rulers and their institutions set, you are going along with atrocities and monstrosity. I guess that's the word. So anyway, this I think is in the picture. I want to ask you as my final question. They both spoke to the need for people to be out in the streets raising hell. I wonder if you could speak to how you see that contributing to getting people thinking about and organized for the kind of revolution that could end this system that does this all together. What's the relationship between fighting this now and getting to a fundamental solution?
Well, I mean, I definitely think, what people have been speaking to here is very important. Like, not what kind of world are we fighting for? What kind of world do people need to be thinking about that's possible? The fact that even thinking about myself 10 years ago, that I wouldn't even think about the possibility of like a whole different world. What difference would it make to even see like people in the streets, talking about a whole different world, that actually does step people outside of the bounds of what exists, everything that people have been speaking to, how you're trained, right from the beginning. How you make change is you vote. When you turn 18, you go and you vote. That's what you look forward to when that's what it means to be an adult. You go and you vote. But like, and because of everything that people have been very like powerfully and very livingly like bringing here around how that's not actually gonna do anything, right? That we need to struggle with people, to see that both what I've been getting a deeper understanding of, which is that that the system of capitalism gave birth to a fascist movement that we're facing today, that capitalism is you can't actually do away with patriarchy under the system of capitalism. And Bob Avakian has done important work in speaking to why that is, that I'm getting myself, a deeper understanding of, and taking out to other people to actually understand. There is a way to understand this, and there is a way to actually change this now, right? And what Tony was talking about, the opening that does exist now, where it may seem like things are going in a very bad direction, and a lot of people might think there's nothing we can do about it, But then what can actually transform when again, drawing from myself, well, the first protest that I went to was like a big deal because I actually felt like I was doing something, and not to try to plead to any of these people in power, but actually, taking this to the neighborhoods of the oppressed, of people that look just like me, that, live and grew up just like me, and taking this to them and actually struggling with them to like, come get into this, how it actually changes you to be in the streets with other people that are nothing like you, that have different backgrounds and have different life experiences, when you hear their stories, all these women, that tell their stories about what it's like to, to get an abortion, and why other people need to actually talk about, both their experiences in having an abortion, and to those people that were alive and can remember the times when abortion was illegal, to be speaking out about this and the reality of that, and how that can change somebody who wasn't even alive in the time when, that's not even a question, because their whole lives they've known, okay, abortion it's there, and so it has everything to do with transforming people's thinking now, and fighting for the whole different society that we're talking about. The Revolution Club, one of our points of attention is, we fight for a world where women, men, and differently gendered people are equals and comrades, where women are not treated as punching bags or sex objects or incubators, This is the kind of world that we're fighting for, and this is the kind of world that's possible. And that's what people need to know about now, that helps them break from everything that is being put forward around a quote-unquote solution.
Well, I think I'm very impressed. I'm very impressed that you got all that in, and right in the amount of time we had left. Listen, I think this is a very important conversation we've been having, all parts of it, starting at the beginning through this. And we're going to continue it. We're going to continue it on the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show. We're going to continue it. I know refusefascism.org is going to continue to write and to explore this on the podcast that Sam hosts. And we're going to continue it on this radio show on We Only Want the World. So I just want to thank all of you for joining me here tonight. Michelle, Tony, Sam, so much.
Thank you so much.
And I want to take a moment and, I want to thank you who's been tuning in online at refusefascism.org, on any of the social media pages, on the Revolution Nothing Less show's YouTube channel at youtube.com/therevcoms, and on the airwaves at WBAI 99.5 FM, and on the airwaves at WBAI 99.5 FM in New York City and WPFW 89.3 FM in Washington, D.C. I want to give our program directors at each of them, Linda Perry up at WBAI and Katia Stitt down at WPFW, for making the time on the airwaves tonight to do this special 2-hour broadcast on the abortion rights emergency. I know that you count on these stations to understand the world that we live in and what's really going on, voices you won't get anywhere else. And it's so important that we've taken the time tonight. If you missed any portion of tonight's broadcast, it was a special 2-hour broadcast. You can find it at the archives at WBAI.org or at WPFWFM.org. And again, it's going to be available at the Revolution Nothing Less show's YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/therevcoms. I want to thank the Revolutionary Future Rock Band, Outer National, for the music I play at the top of every show. I want to thank Sierra Shine for engineering in Washington, D.C., and for covering this topic tonight as well. Reggie Johnson for engineering up in New York City, and Atlas Winfrey, Pete Ha, and Federico here at the RNL Revolution Nothing Less studio. I want to ask you to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Sunsara Taylor. And please do subscribe to the Revolution Nothing Less show at youtube.com/therevcoms. We upload new episodes every Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Before I sign off, I want to announce for everybody listening in the New York City area 2 important events coming up at Revolution Books in Harlem in New York City. This Saturday, September 25th at 3 p.m., there's a program called Heroism for Our Times. Free all of Iran's political prisoners now, an afternoon of solidarity and resistance. This is very important. Come up to Revolution Books this Saturday, 3 p.m., September 15th. Free all Iranian political prisoners. And then next Wednesday, September 29th at 7 p.m., a very special program at Revolution Books. It is the 60th anniversary edition of The Wretched of the Earth. There will be a conversation. Cornel West will speak on the anniversary of the publication of that book, and he'll be in conversation with Andy Z, who is the spokesperson for Revolution Books. He's also the host of the Revolution Nothing Less show, and it'll be a great night, so you don't want to miss either of those if you could get to them. Both programs at Revolution Books require proof of vaccination for entry, or you can sit outside where there will also be seating. And you can find more information at revolutionbooksnyc.org. That's revolutionbooksnyc.org. And with that, I want to say the problem is not human nature. It is the nature of the system. Through a real revolution, a better world is possible. I will talk to you next week.
Que